you everyone for joining our little session here. As David said, my name's Millie, MILLGATE, and I'm the executive producer for Sounds Australia. So I did want to thank David for extending the invitation and for Fabi for including me at SIM this week. I'm really, really excited to be here. I've never been to Brazil, so it's a first for me. I'm trying very hard to speak slowly, but yell out if it's a little bit too fast. What I was hoping to do today was cover quite a lot of ground on the Australian music market and share with you a little bit about our country and where we're sitting at the moment. So I was going to give you a glance of Australia, a bit of geography, look at the music market and a snapshot there, delve a little bit deeper into the recording and the digital and the live area. I also wanted to let you know about the opportunities in terms of radio, print and online and how you can market and promote yourself in the country. Look a little bit at the visas and tax and all the really boring parts, but are the most necessary at times. And then go into some of the resources that are available, industry associations that might be able to help, and then go into the Sounds Australia project and let you know a little bit about what we do. So Australia is a country, we're a little over 23 million people. Our average age is 37.3. 81% of us only speak English, which I think is highly embarrassing, but nevertheless, that's how we were raised and that is the case. Pretty high GDP per capita. I'm sorry about the lines in the middle here. They're kind of going to hit some of the information. The mobile penetration is pretty high. I would suggest a little over one per person all have mobile phones. In terms of the actual size of the country, very similar to Brazil, but we're definitely a very large surface area where there's only 2 people per square metre and a very urbanised country at that. And the average age expectancy in 2012 was 83. So the geography, depending on what airline you fly with, it can take anywhere between 17 hours and 30 hours to get from Sao Paulo to the east coast of Australia. I'll just let you know, I took the 30-hour option to get here, so it was a very long trip. 70% of the population lives on the east coast of Australia. Sydney and Melbourne, which is New South Wales based, and Victoria are the 2 key music markets. And Perth on the west coast is the 5th most isolated city in the world, and we're only 4 hours away from New Zealand. So I think often when artists and agents are looking at Australia as a touring market, they're definitely looking at New Zealand at the same time, and certainly now more of the Asian regions as well as infrastructure grows in those emerging markets. So here was a fascinating little map that I found. I hope you can see from there. Come up closer if you want. I know the screen's quite far back. But if you look at the actual size of our countries, they're not too dissimilar. So the general snapshot, at the moment, Australia's sitting as the 6th biggest music market in the world. We had a little downturn in sales this year, but we're still I think it's been the last 3 years, we've maintained that number 6 position. One of the things that's quite unique to Australia, and not unique in a good way, is we have very low quotas for our radio. So radio in Australia only plays 20% local content, which is really, really different to other markets, certainly Japan, Germany, where it's at least 80% is the local artists are being played. That's not the case in Australia, so it's actually very good for people coming from other markets. We have a really strong Australian dollar. Our economy at the moment is incredibly buoyant, and we managed to get through the recession relatively unharmed, as much as our politicians would like to tell you otherwise. Broadband is a little bit of a growing area for us. It's certainly there, but the Wi-Fi can be pretty dodgy, so the networks are improving. And I guess one of our strongest areas is the live side and the money that can be made from touring and selling merchandise. We're also the first country in the world where the sales of the sale of digital outweighed the fall in physical. I've highlighted, these are the recording stats that come from the International Federation of the Phonographic Industry, and I wanted to highlight both where Australia and Brazil sits. I'd be very surprised if you can read this because it is really small, but I am happy to share the data afterwards. But it does sort of show, you know, we're compared to all the different music markets in the world, we're not too far apart. And just looking at the similarities and where we differ a little, you guys are definitely buying a lot more physical product than what they are in Australia. And certainly on the performing rights, there's a lot more money coming in there as well, which I found quite fascinating. In terms of the music environment, there's a real strong British and American influence. So if you have done well in those markets, if you've done well in the US, if you've done well in the UK, there's a really good chance that that will replicate into Australia as well. With respect to the physical market, it's a pretty robust infrastructure, but there is one really dominant retailer called JB Hi-Fi, which is something you'd get to know. Again, I mentioned our digital and physical is now at 54 and 37%, and the huge festival market. So some of the genres that are definitely areas that you can do well in Australia, EDM, so this whole dance explosion that's taking off in North America, and again I think in the Asian markets, is something that I think Australia for the last 25 years has really been cultivating quality dance artists, and I think a lot of that has come from the UK and Europe influence for us. And again, there's a really huge dance circuit of live shows. That one in the middle there talks about regional areas where our country music, the real, you know, country is in country and western, that's where that works particularly well in the more regional and farming areas of Australia. We do have post-hardcore and metal bands often topping the independent charts. There's really nice niches and genres for those markets. And there's a huge Aussie hip-hop scene. And it's a funny one with hip-hop in Australia. There's a very much a cultural phenomena that we have to rap in an Australian accent and in an Aussie accent that doesn't always translate internationally. So it's not something we've exported very well, but in terms of hip-hop, there's a great market for it in Australia. I've just listed some Australian acts that you may not have known were Australian. Gautier and Flume, Sia, obviously AC/DC I think most people would have heard of, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, some of the younger artists like Chet Faker, Wolfmother, Tommy Trash, Iggy Azalea, Havana Brown. There's a lot of artists in all kinds of genres that are doing really well now in the international space, but I just thought it was worth letting you know some of the Australian acts. So again, when we look at the digital activity, what we learned was Australia's the biggest pirates in the world. Probably not something we should be proud of, but what it has meant that as much as we're downloading more information, downloads illegally, it's translating to the fact that we're also then going on to buy it. So that, I guess it's that old idea, if you can access the music for free initially and hear it, that's really happening in Australia. People are definitely searching for music, consumers are seeking it out and they're using digital means to do it, but it's actually translating then into sales at the furthest point, which is really where you want it to happen. It shows that there's a real great return in terms of digital strategy in Australia. And it also, we've noticed that we're at a very expensive price point as well. So our average iTunes downloads is $1.69, which is a lot higher than a lot of other markets. These are some of the digital services that have come and gone into the Australian market. I think being quite a confined and smaller market, a lot of the bigger services really chose Australia as a bit of a test market. I think we were the second Pandora came into, so they've really used it as a bit of a weeding out and a testing ground. A lot of the beta services come in there first, and we've got some that are only Australian. When we talk about radio formats in Australia, there's three really distinct areas where you can really strive for airplay. The first, and the one I think we're most fortunate to have, is a national broadcaster. So we have government-funded radio that broadcasts all around the country. It started just being in key cities, but now you can get it in every single regional pocket. So for all the kids living in the, out of the major cities, this radio station, Triple J, which is, we call it the youth network, has become a really key tool for them to find and discover new music, and certainly for any artists from overseas coming into Australia, particularly in the indie, alternate, folk, even that world, are absolutely going to do really well to get Triple J. If you can get Triple J airplay, it gives you a really good chance to then tour, because everyone nationally is hearing those songs. The equivalent there for a more adult contemporary type market is the Radio National, so it's a more older type music, and there's also SBS with the multicultural broadcasting. There are 3 main commercial stations. It's probably the same with most commercial radio. It is really, really hard to get on commercial radio. Our radio is a problem in Australia. I think it serves mostly as a portal for people to advertise, and they occasionally put music in between. I don't mean to be that cynical about it, but it's a really tough one. If you get it, and if you're able to secure airplay on commercial radio, it can really set you up. They also tend to syndicate from the main stations out into smaller stations, so it's the same music getting played over and over and over again. I think a really exciting part of the radio landscape in Australia is our community radio. There are literally hundreds of really great, healthy community radio stations around the country that have all their different community involved, and they have lots of different niche programming, specialist program, and really, really passionate volunteers predominantly playing music on those stations. And I think for artists coming in, you really need to look at what's available in that world as well. When we think about radio, yes, you want airplay, but it's also about using radio as a way to take on interviews and promote yourself if you are coming into the market. Print media for Australia, you're always going to be better served if you engage a local publicist, if you engage a PR team that works in the market, that can get some press for you in the lead up if you're coming in, or if you're releasing, to come and let people know about you in advance. And often if you've done a distribution deal, you'll have label partners that can offer those services as well. That said, we do have a lot of free music media that's still being printed in pretty much each of the states. Some of them have 2 competing magazines where they're more than happy to list what's happening. And I think for international artists coming in, they're always going to run a story on you. So there is ways to access that directly. Mainstream newspapers, your dailies, your big broadsheets, a little harder to get, but they all do have an entertainment or a music section. And I think, again, coming from Brazil, you know, being something that's new to our country, a little bit more exotic, there'd be a really good shot if you're getting some press in those newspapers. And we still do get the glossy magazines, taking cues from Rolling Stone, Uncut, and Mojo coming in. So online media, and again, I'm happy to circulate these websites. These are just some of the key websites and blogs. Some of them are really just talking about Australian music. Others are Australian-based, but talking about influential acts that are coming in. And others are genre-specific, but it's just a variety of the ones that I think are the key ones that you'd really want to start to target. And I think like everyone, we definitely take our cues from really key international blogs. So your Drowned in Sound, your Pitchforks, your Enemies, all of those sort of really still play a big influencer role. So again, if you're having success there, people in Australia are watching those sites, and it does pay dividends back into Australia. As I mentioned earlier, a real strength is the Australian live industry. So performance numbers were at 1.48 billion in total revenue last year, and that was an increase of 22.7%. Attendance was up overall, and including paid tickets and those that were actually sold, it's a little over 16 million tickets. So Australian audiences love going out, and they really love going to see live music. Of all the different performing areas, contemporary music remains the largest sector. And they also have had an increase in the amount of people going to see contemporary music. The revenue really, though, has been explained by an increase in a ticket price. So this is 110 Australian dollars average ticket price. Now, that's for the much bigger concerts as well. So when you look at touring, and I think it's the same when you're looking at any market, you've got to really decipher what kind of level are you coming into the market at. Are you already, is there a buzz about you? Is there already, a team on the ground working with you? Or is there already airplay? And where would you be positioning yourself? But I guess the thing I wanted to talk about are the types of tours. So people would come in and they might do an East Coast tour. So they come in and they'd probably start in Brisbane and they'd do Brisbane and they'd do Sydney and they'd come down to Melbourne and they might do a couple of the other cities that are 2-hour drives from the capital cities. If you're going to do a national tour, you would take in all of the country, which is, you're going to have to be at a pretty big level to be doing that kind of touring. And others that have had a little bit of success but need to get in and out really quickly will come in and just do capital city tours. So they're not getting into any of the regional areas, they're just coming in and doing those key towns. The types of venues, and I'll just go through this, there's enormous amounts of places to play, and I know the figure before was the live industry in general, but in 2012, the Australian live venue-only industry was valued at $1.3 billion. So there's serious opportunities to play live. Entertainment centres, tennis arenas, football stadiums, that's for all your really big international touring artists. Sometimes they'll need to do 2 nights in a city. Theatres, so much more multi-purpose venues. I understand there's a bit of a theatre circuit here that I'm really keen to learn more about. But that's one that's often up for multicultural programming as well. Sporting and recreation clubs, hotels and pubs, that's what we kind of call clubs, I guess, and venues. There's pretty much one on every corner in most parts of Australia, and those venues can have everywhere into, they might have 1 live music night a week, others will have 7 nights a week live music, and I think that's the real crux of why Australian bands are quite renowned for how well they play live. It's the incredible pub and bar scene that actually supports and promotes and cultivates live music. War Memorials, Ex-Servicemen's Club, again for a bit of an older kind of, again more the country type of music. University campuses and student unions are a really good one. They're not as easy as they used to be to get into, and their budgets have been cut quite a bit, but they're still a really good place if you can time tours around picking up a uni show in amongst another sort of touring dates is really, really helpful. Town halls, again, more in country and regional areas, and house concerts and folk kind of tours are becoming a little bit more popular. It wasn't really a thing. I think it's something that Canada absolutely does incredibly well. Parts of Europe with the house concert circuits. I think that's something that's starting to happen a little bit more in Australia. The really big one though is outdoor festivals, and I think honestly you could pretty much pick any single weekend and there'd be a festival on somewhere in Australia. The core touring time for those festivals though would be from early in the new year. There's about 3 or 4 New Year festivals through to later April. So it's the first 4 months are the real kind of crux of when the big festivals are happening. And these 6 websites here, and again I'm happy to pass the material on, just give you links to all the different festivals. I didn't think I'd waste your time with writing them all up, but there are literally hundreds. So what I did do, I'm just going to have a glass of water. Sorry, can people understand? Is this, yes? Yeah? So coming here, I thought I'd ask 10 festivals some questions that I could relay, so I can give you a little bit of information about the festivals in particular, because if you're anything like the Australian artists, when they look to go abroad, festivals can often be that really great leveraging point where you can anchor a tour around it. It definitely gets you in front of a whole lot of people in the one hit. And it's also guilt by association. If you've played on certain festivals, they definitely give you quite a bit of credibility and, a little bit of a positioning within a new market. So what I've done is I've come up with 10 festivals. 3 of them are showcase conference events, like an event like SIM, like a South by Southwest, CMJ, The Great Escape, Liverpool Sound City, that kind of an event. And the other 7 are different types of festivals. And so these were the questions that I asked them. I asked them what their dates were for next year. How many years has the festival been running? Approximately how many artists perform at each of their shows? Which cities does the festival happen in? We have a number of festivals that are touring festivals. It's not just one location. They move around the country. What are their audience numbers? How do they secure talent for the festival? How do you get booked to play them? How do they discover new artists? What kind of genres do they program? Have they ever booked a Brazilian act on their festival before? And would they be interested in booking a Brazilian act? So these were the questions that people kindly shared. So Blues Fest happens in Byron Bay, and it's definitely one of the bigger events. It's a 4-day festival. I think it flipped to 5 at one point, and it's come back, and I reckon I'm going to need my glasses to read these. I'm sorry, guys. Hang on. Okay, so it's been going for 26 years. They have more than 200 artists play at the festival. It takes place in a city called Byron Bay, which is one of the most gorgeous parts of Australia, if you ever do get out there, which is right on the New South Wales kind of Queensland border, closer to Queensland, and definitely right on the beach there. They have over 100,000 people attend. So the way they look for acts and how they secure talent, they invite artists. So all their big headliners, they're going after them all year round. So they invite those. They definitely take pictures from local and international agents. So if you have an agent that you're working with here, they're the type of people that could go directly to the festival. And they also are a festival that has an application process for emerging talent. So there's a website link there and you can just apply, and they're the kind of festival that they know they're going to sell tickets, they know they're going to have a great audience, and they're willing to take a punt on just great bands. So if you can put a really good kit together, a really good promo live video, that's the type of thing they're looking for. They discover acts from online blogs, from streaming services, attending other international showcases. I know the director goes to New Orleans Jazz Festival quite a bit to find artists, and often recommendations from colleagues, from other artists that play the festival. I don't know if it's the same here, but you know, as much as it's a blues festival, when you ask him what you program, it's now very wide. So it's rock, hip-hop, blues and roots, country, reggae, folk, and some pop. So that's a whole lot of genres for a blues festival. So I think it's worth kind of getting that intel, because if you just saw the name Blues Fest and you were a hip-hop group, you might never consider it. So just a little bit of a tip before. No Brazilian acts yet, but if it was suitable, he certainly would. Groove in the Moo is a festival that takes place late April and early May. It's in its 10th year. They have 5 international acts and 20 locals, and that same group of acts tour around the country. So the really defining thing and their point of difference is it's in regional towns. Groove in the Moo doesn't take place in any capital cities, which is a really, I think, delightful opportunity for artists to play in front of people that don't normally get the big shows. So the audiences are often that little bit more excited and that little bit more really respectful and grateful that the acts have come to their town. They don't have a submission process of such. They book acts that have toured throughout the year and have had some radio play, and they focus on strong live acts with a back catalogue. They discover new artists mostly online, again, or at showcase and international events. And they try to have a wide variety, but pop, roots, dance, hip-hop and rock is Groove in the Moo. Again, they haven't had a Brazilian act yet, but they're always keen to hear new sounds. The Laneway Festival, this is the 11th year coming up for Laneway. They have 20 international acts, or 20 acts for the Singapore event, and Auckland is about 28 to 30, and around 34 from each of the Australian cities. So it happens in Brisbane, Sydney, Adelaide, Melbourne and Fremantle, which is in Western Australia, and the audience is around 80,000 once you kind of add up the total there. They select and they invite artists, and they're definitely interested in accepting pitches from both local and international agents and managers directly. Online blogs, streaming services, again, you're going to hear this often, attending international showcases. One thing the Australian festivals do, the promoters do, they get out and they use these events to discover new talent. So they're going each year to the South by Southwest event, Great Escape, Music Matters, CMJ. they're also taking recommendations from colleagues. They do program all genres, but it's predominantly indie, electronic, hip-hop, punk and rock. They haven't had many Brazilian acts. I'm pretty sure they're talking about CSS has played there. And they're always open to good music, no matter where it's from. Port Fairy is one of the very bigger, longer-running folk festivals. They're up to their 38th festival was this year. They have 100 artists play across the festival, 20 international and 80 local. And it just takes place in the one place in Victoria. 80,000 aggregated over the 4 days of the festival. And they're another festival that has an expressions of interest process. So again, you can apply, and they are going through each of the applications directly. Again, going to events, but you'll notice it's not South by Southwest and CMJ, it's Folk Alliance, Showcase Scotland, English Folk Expo. So they're really sort of targeting much more singer-songwriter and the folk-based artists, roots, folk, jazz, cabaret, bluegrass, comedy, spoken word. They haven't booked a Brazilian act yet. I'm sure they would if it makes sense for their programming. Soundwave Festival is our really hard metal, really sort of full-on end of the rock side of things. It's in its 11th year. They have 90 internationals. This festival does get criticised quite a bit because they don't actually program many Australian artists. They're absolutely all about what's good and what they think their audience will like. So there are opportunities there. They select and invite artists thereafter, but they also take pictures. Again, they're looking for acts through streaming services and recommendations, rock, metal, punk, hardcore and ska. In terms of Brazilian acts, they've said here that they've got Max Cavalera is playing this coming January festival as part of the metal supergroup Killer Be Killed. And what they wanted to make clear was that they don't book artists on the basis of origin. If they have a good profile, if they tour hard, great fans and we like them, then they'll be booked. So there's opportunities there if you're in the harder persuasion. Falls Festival, another camping festival. This one takes place in 4 locations now. It's just added another one. Victoria, Tasmania, WA, New South Wales. This is around the New Year's Eve into early January period. They don't have a submission process. They book acts that have toured throughout the year and have radio play. And again, if there's a strong live catalogue, they're always open to a wide variety. They've had CSS twice, and they're really keen on new sounds, and they think it actually offers a point of difference to their festival. So I think we're seeing a bit of a theme here that whilst not many of these acts have had Brazilian artists perform, when I talk to all the programmers and the directors, there's a real appetite if they find the right artists, and I don't think anyone would have submitted before. So I think there is a real kind of opportunity there. Woodford is one of the most beautiful festivals. It takes place in far north Queensland. They definitely do have an expressions of interest, and I don't have it here, but I think they said I think it was 3 in 10 will get selected, so it's a pretty good odds there. A whole host of different genres. They've definitely booked, 1 in 10 applications are accepted. We'd of course select them if they were suitable, and we welcome expressions of interest from everywhere. So again, another one really with an appetite for international acts. So as I mentioned, there's 3 different events. There's actually more than 3, but I think these are the most relevant, that are the Showcase Conference Festivals, which are the professional development. They've got the sessions and the panels and the networking opportunities and the showcasing. So there's the AUMI, which is the Australasian World Music Expo. It takes place in November. It's been running for 7 years, and they have 50 international acts in total. Audience is a lot smaller because, as I've said, it's like a sim. There's 5,000 in terms of the numbers that come to the shows. They do accept pictures, but there's definitely an application process. And they're an event that's looking to twin with other festivals. So they're looking for opportunities. They've started a relationship with Showcase Scotland. They've just started one this year with Canada. So I think, David, that's one we could probably talk about. They're looking for international acts to get involved. Big Sound's definitely our biggest international, well, I guess in terms of the amount of international acts that come in, and it's certainly the real gathering of the Australian music industry. If you ever wanted to just come out to Australia, just to do a bit of a go before you show and see what it's all about and meet a whole lot of people, this is the one, just because pretty much no one else is going to be home. They're all going to be in Big Sound when this happens. They have 140 official showcasing the industry. There's 1,200 Australian music industry there, and they also include the general public in the concert, so there's about 4,000 people. There's an application process, and a number of key tastemakers are making that decision there. So if they do decide they like what they hear, and the thing he's made a really good point about, he said as long as they had a plan and that he felt that there was an opportunity for them to grow in the market. So I think it's really good that they're thinking about, why would we bring a Brazilian act in if it was just a one-off? You know, they really want to make that relationship work. So if they feel that there's a future and that you've got a plan and that you can do more, they're the sorts of acts they're looking for, ones that can develop a longer term career. An EMC Play, it's a much newer event. This year, it's actually happening right now, is only their 3rd year, but I think it's one that's going to just keep growing and growing. It's the dance event. There's so much great dance coming out of Australia, and they team it and time it alongside Stereosonic, which is one of the bigger dance festivals. So they're pulling in a lot of the international players that are coming out for that event. So the quality of the speakers is second to none, and it's also now where a lot of the dance artists are really just getting their first sort of, you know, start into the showcasing conference world. So again too, they're definitely looking for relationships in emerging markets, and they can see opportunities in South America for Australian dance, and I think they'd like to be part of reciprocating that. So that was just a little bit more meat in terms of what kinds of festivals that we have. If you are coming to Australia, and as I said, this is the really boring, horrible part, but you do need to have entertainment visas to enter the country. You do need a sponsor involved, so whether that's the agent or the festival that's brought you in, or a record label that they're going to partner with, or there are some other agents around that just do immigration and sponsoring. But that is what you're going to need. You need to apply for tax file number. Now, all of it sounds long and tedious. It's quite a simple process. You just need to know, A, that you have to do it, and B, you need to start early and you need to prepare early. So as much as if you're thinking about Australia as a market and you're learning and you're researching and you're preparing, this is one of the things you just have to have in your head. I've got to do it, so you've got to start the process early. That line has just based itself right down the middle there. These were the wonderful acronyms, and I think for every one of these associations there's equivalent here. David, if you want to yell them out, if you know what they are. So APRA is our Australian Performing Right Association, so they're collecting on behalf of the songwriters and the authors. The PPCA is the phonographic, so they're collecting in terms of the master and the mechanical sync. ARIA is the Australian Recording Industry Association. The AAM is the Association of Artist Managers, so they're a member of the IMMF, and I understand there's a Latin American MMF starting as well for music managers, which would be an equivalent there as well. AIR is the Australian Independent Record Labels, and AMPAL is Australian Publishers. And I just thought, often, whilst they're all set up to represent Australian artists, they're certainly there as a really good resource for others, and there's always going to be a similar body here, so I think it's always a good way to start exchange as well. Some of the resources, we have an Australian Music Industry Directory. It's available online subscription for $40, and that includes all the listed companies, individuals and companies. Really worth it, I guess, if you definitely are looking at Australia as a market. It's a bit of a one-stop shop there. And the other resource that I thought was worth looking at is the Sounds Australia app, and that's what we use when we go to markets and we go to events, but it also becomes an archive. So it's available for free on the App Store and Google Play, and what you'll find in it, as much as it has all the artist profiles, it also has all our industry. So I think you'll notice every single one of those festivals I said that they're going to, all the big international festivals, they're all listed in this app as well. So there's just one click and you've got their emails. So did you want me to go into Sounds Australia project now? Yep, keep going. Okay. So we were set up in 2009. It was a federal government initiative through our Australia Council, through the Arts Council, and it was set up to establish a cohesive and a strategic approach to helping export Australian music. Up until that point, we had some of the state governments, so provincial sort of or regions, doing a little bit of activity overseas, but for the most part, there wasn't any kind of, here's Australia when we'd go to these events. So the idea was to have, I guess, a portal and a brand that could help promote Australians in the international space. So for us, our stakeholders are, of course, the artists, federal government. So there's 3 areas of federal government that come through and fund us now. The music businesses, so the companies, the publishers, the labels, the synchronisation, the managers, they all are tied up in there. We also have state government invest, the industry associations I mentioned, and some philanthropic and some commercial partners. And when we go to these events, there's 3 areas that we absolutely look for. And the first is we're delivering where we can the best possible environment for the Australian artists to showcase. So every time that they're going to these events, for those that have ever gone to South by Southwest or gone to any one of them, you get one play. You get one official invite when you get selected, which is a really long way to go. It's a long way for you guys to go to Austin from here. It's a hell of a long way to go from Australia. So what we try and do is provide additional second play opportunities. And I know it's what David's done in the past as well. It's about getting you guys in front of the right people and for us putting the Australians in front of the right people. We're always looking to add value networking opportunities, business matching opportunities at international events, and again, centralise that strategy. There's no point South Australia or Western Australia or Queensland going into these international markets and trying to promote a city or a state. They're lucky that they don't think we're from Austria. We need to really kind of pull our resources and create that one banner. This is just a list of the events that we participated in this year. And then what we also do is we do undertake reconnaissance activity, which is, you'll see the very last one is SIM, which is me being here. So before we go into any of these markets, we need to go and see it. We need to see what it's all about, who are the type of people going, what opportunities are there for Australian artists. Is this an event that if we're not going to be participating in, will our artists be at a disadvantage? How many things are going on at the same time? Is there competition with the showcasing? There's a whole list that I have of tick points before we decide that we're going to invest money into a market. So these are some of the ones that we took a look at this year to see whether they were worthwhile and whether they'll make it onto next year's program. When we talk about market events, as I said, performance opportunities are the big one. So for us, we do it under the banner of the Aussie Barbecue. That's our flagship showcasing event. But what we found is that we're starting to get too many artists going now. There's a lot of Australians that are exporting and we can't fit everyone on the Aussie Barbecue. But for some acts, they don't need to be presented in a rowdy, boozy party atmosphere. It's actually much better for them to be in a stripped-back, more curated environment. So we created Sound Gallery for those kind of artists, and Beat Pie is in keeping with the idea of having the dance acts represented. And it's always about that second play performance. Networking opportunities really take all kinds of different forms. One of the things that we do every year at the Great Escape is a sit-down lunch. So we invite key people from the UK and international industry to sit next to the Australian managers. And we know if you look at the app, when you look at an artist profile, the very last question is, what are you looking for at the Great Escape? And they might say, a UK agent, we want a UK publicist, but we'd also like some European festivals. So when we sit everyone at this lunch, it's like a wedding. We're putting people next to people that we really hope that they can form some kind of arrangement with, or at least get a conversation going, and then they can hopefully come and see their act later that day. Tim Tam Slams, one-on-one meetings. At South by Southwest, we always do a breakfast panel and pick a topic and invite speakers. Country Connections is an event that we coordinate with our different colleagues. So we do it with David for Brazil. We work with the Canadians, the Germans, the Nordics, Ireland, New Zealand and the UK are the main partners. And what we recognise is for a lot of us, whilst these events are happening and so much is going on, what we really want is for all the people that are there with the Australian delegation to actually meet the people at the Brazilian delegation and the people in the UK. So we coordinate our own events, and we've started to do that now I think it's into its third year at South by Southwest. We do a day before the Great Escape. We're starting to look at other places where Country Connections works really well. Trade shows, I think this one's pretty simple. There's trade shows at MIDEM, at South by Americana and WOMEX, so we'll sort of have that representation for the Australians and coordinate their meeting schedules. And then a whole lot of marketing and promotion. So it could be creating collateral, it could just be branding, venues, fold-outs, banners. Again, anything that we can do to make it as easy as possible for people to find the Australians at those events and for them to be recognised and hopefully put in front of the right people. So since we started in 2009, we've participated in 40 different international events, most of them multiple times. We've been to events now taking place in 44 cities in 16 countries. There's a team of 3. I have 2 other people with me. We don't have anyone based internationally. We're going to these events with the Australians. There's been 512 Australian artists have exported and showcased under that Sounds Australia banner since January 2009, and 201 of them have done it at more than one event, and in many cases quite a few, with the most being at around 8 events that they've done over the course of that time. The number of Australians showcasing across the globe, I guess, so the first year we started there were 49 artists that showcased in that year. We've just finished and there were 263 acts this year that showcased internationally with Sounds Australia. So it's a 437% increase in the amount of Australians that are getting overseas, that are finding markets, that are doing their homework beforehand, that are researching, preparing, and then we're helping them get abroad. And that's just some of the breakdowns in terms of the amount of artists that have been going each year to these events, some of the bigger ones. And that's it.
Tem perguntas? Eu quero ter uma... Quanto custa a passagem São Paulo, Austrália?
Goodness me, I think it was around about $2,500.
US dollars.
Yeah,
Okay.
2.5 to 3, I think. Yeah.
Ok, outro. Bandas do Reino Unido, Estados Unidos, quando eles vão para a Austrália, eles fazem turnê também na Ásia. Eles não vão somente para a Austrália.
Yeah, and I think they're trying to do that more and more so. Sorry, I can't listen to myself at the same time. Yeah, and I think when you look at a map, it makes a lot of sense. You know, you go, we're going to go from the UK, we'll go through Asia, and we'll go to Australia. I think it's still, in terms of the Asian infrastructure and the touring opportunities in Asia, it's still in its infancy, but we're seeing the growth is incredible and it's happening very, very quickly. And in terms of Australian agents and promoters, now there's probably the top 5 agents and promoters have actually started to set up offices in Asia. They've started to extend their tours to Asia. So I think more and more so, the people that you'd be dealing with here would be able to offer that as an extension, whereas in the past it was a little bit piecemeal. You had to do it yourself and try and find someone on the ground in Japan or try and find someone in Malaysia or Taiwan or India. But I think we're working, and the Australian industry generally is working so much closer with Asia. We really need to. They're one of our, greatest trading partners, and I think this is passing on through to what we can do culturally. And I think, yeah, certainly the guys we deal with, we do a tour in India every year. Those guys are actively now trying to join the dots. So, yeah, it's happening. It's not as upfront and obvious as you'd like right now, but watch that space. And I think in the next 3 years, without question.
Okay. But I would presume it doesn't make sense to go illegally to Australia, like as a tourist, whatever, to perform, because it's such a big distance and so on that it makes more sense to go officially with a proper visa.
I think so. Look, it's a hard one on that front because I really understand the extra costs and the extra difficulties. I think and I'd have to do a bit of research and I'd be happy to look into it for you. If you were to coming to the AUMI, so the Australian World Music Expo, or Big Sound, or EMC, you can do the cultural convention visa. And I think there's opportunities for exchange there. And there's certainly other types, like a visa waiver program, but it'd have to just depend on what else you were doing, and it would mean you probably couldn't do any other touring around it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, so the final question is, you're here because you want to research the market and possibilities for Australian acts.
Yes.
This is for when and how and what?
I think more and more Australian acts are starting to look at South America. I think in terms of opportunities that we have with support from our government, we've got a big focus on Brazil in 2016. So I know that there's additional support and funds that I can access. So if we're going to come in to a market, I'd much prefer to have, you know, information in advance and to meet as many people as I can and hopefully set up some partnerships before we get here, rather than just kind of going, oh, we've got money, we can go to Brazil, everyone come in, you know, shake hands, isn't that lovely, and then we go away and that's it. I'd rather look at a longer term strategy, start to see what's available. And in the last year I went to BAFIM, which is in Buenos Aires, to Amplifica in Chile. I'm going to go to Circle Art next year. And so I'm definitely interested in Brazil as a market, but I think for Australians coming this far, we would look to include other parts of South America as well. And I'd really like to see that if we can build something toward 2016, that could become a regular touring circuit for some Australian artists. And the other thing that we're starting to do more is collaborative projects and songwriting projects. So APRA, which is our collecting society, they have an initiative called Song Hubs. And again, just coming from India, we spent a week where we had the 4 touring groups and all the songwriters were in the studio, one of the big Bollywood studios, with a number of different Indian writers, and they came out of that session with 18 new songs. And some of them are fantastic. So I'd like to see that could be a really lovely exchange between Australian artists and Brazilian artists, if we can build that into what we're doing as well.
Okay. The information you have here you can send to people by email? It's okay?
I'm happy to send it maybe to yourself or
to me,
to
I can give
Sim,
it out to people.
and then you can send it to your membership or to...
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Questions, doubts, dúvidas?
Hi. I'd like to know if there's an World Music Festival there. Yeah. Is there any World Music Festival in Australia?
Which one was that? World
Music.
Well, the AUMI Festival it used to be called the Australasian World Music Festival, but they changed it to worldwide in the last couple of years just to broaden their scope. But it's much more about roots, I guess is the term. Is that word?
It'll be kind of like an Australian WOMEX feel to it.
That's AUMI.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And that event in particular really does focus on bringing in Asian presenters. A lot of the artists are also from the Christmas Islands and Asia, like from the Maori artists, and a lot of our Indigenous artists. That's where they showcase. So Aboriginal Australian artists. So.
Okay. Is that me?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Oh, one more in the middle.
Hello, my name is Fernando, and I work with instrumental music and classical music. Instrumental and classical music. Do you have any specific tip or any region in Australia or any specific festival that focus on instrumental or classical music?
There's some new music festivals that have instrumental base, but it's kind of more on the real contemporary new music end. I'd have to hear is that the sort of stuff you're talking about? Yeah, so there's one called the New Festival. There's about 3 I can think of. And if I can give you my card, and if you follow up, I can let you know what they are.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think, look, a country like Australia, we're so multicultural, and I think for everything there is here, there's a version of there. You just got to find the little pockets and who's doing it, I think. So, thank you for having me.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.